I never believed in hauntings. Never. Until I was transferred to St. Clair Secondary, a small, weathered school on the outskirts of Toulouse. The building was older than it appeared on the maintenance records, its stone walls worn grey, the wooden floors creaking beneath every step. The staff spoke in hushed tones about quirks and old building problems, but I quickly realised there was something else going on, something that no one admitted aloud. It started the first week of classes. My name is Marc Delacroix, made up for this story, and I had been assigned room 12, a narrow rectangular classroom at the end of the third-floor corridor. The window overlooked the playground, where the autumn sun glimmered across fallen leaves, but inside, the room felt darker, colder, as if the walls absorbed light. The students were typical, chatty, restless, but polite enough. I introduced myself, arranged my desk, and began preparing the lesson. I had just started writing notes on the blackboard when I noticed a strange tugging in my hand. The chalk moved unevenly, almost as if the air itself was guiding my movements. My hand jerked sideways, unwilling, and the chalk traced a single word in uneven letters. "Look." I froze, heart pounding. I had written nothing like it, and the handwriting wasn't mine. My own lines on the board were clean and straight. This was jagged, sharp, urgent. I erased it quickly, pretending the motion was accidental, but the chalk still left faint impressions in the dust on the board. I stared at the clean black surface for several minutes, half convinced it would reappear. When the students entered, they noticed nothing. They were busy settling in, talking among themselves, laughing over a trivial joke. My unease grew. It wasn't the students, it was the room. The next few days escalated quickly. Books would fall from the shelves. The projector sometimes switched on by itself. Footsteps echoed in the empty hallway outside the classroom. Once, I arrived early and found my lesson plan spread across the floor, arranged neatly as if someone had inspected it. I asked the janitor if he had been in the room, but he shook his head and walked away. The cold spots started next. They were subtle at first, an icy draft brushing my neck, the edge of the chalkboard suddenly freezing my fingertips. But then it became more insistent. Every time I turned my back to write, every time I moved to check a student's work, I felt eyes on me. And then came the day I couldn't ignore it. It was a Thursday afternoon, the sky grey and heavy with rain. The students were working on their essays, tapping pens and muttering quietly. I stepped to the board to write a quote from Camus, my hand shaking slightly from exhaustion. The chalk trailed unevenly, then jerked sideways. My arm felt compelled, pushed by an unseen force. I tried to resist, my fingers clenched around the stick, but it continued, drawing jagged lines across the board. When I stepped back to see what it had written, my stomach sank. "You're not alone." The letters were enormous, stretching across the board, uneven and almost pleading. My pulse thundered in my ears. The students glanced up briefly, but none said anything. They didn't see it. Only I did. I rubbed my eyes. I pinched myself. When I looked again, the words had faded slightly, but the indentation in the chalk dust remained. My hand trembled uncontrollably. I could feel it, someone or something, observing me from the shadows of the room. The bell rang, and the students filed out. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered. I stood frozen at the board, chalk in hand, sweat running down my back. I spent the evening walking the empty corridors, hoping for some rational explanation. None came. By the end of the week, the incidents were impossible to ignore. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Footsteps and whispers echoed in empty classrooms. Cold spots followed me from one end of the building to the other, and every time I dared to glance at the board, Faint scratches appeared, sometimes letters, sometimes shapes, as if the chalk remembered what had been written. I tried to confide in my colleagues. Most laughed politely, attributing my stories to stress, fatigue, or the quirks of an old building. No one else had ever seen the writing appear on the board or felt the cold draft sweep across the room. I stopped telling them. One evening, I stayed after hours to face it, determined to understand. The school was silent, except for the hum of the radiator and the occasional drip from the roof. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing against my chest. I turned on the classroom lights and stepped to the board. I whispered aloud, though there was no one there to hear. "I see you. I know you're here." The chalk in my hand moved again. This time, it traced a single word slowly, deliberately. "Stay." I stepped back. The temperature dropped instantly, my breath fogging in the fluorescent glow. A cold breeze brushed past me, though the windows were shut. I felt a presence behind me, not threatening, but insistent. The board seemed to breathe with the memory of the word. I stayed there for hours, trying to keep calm, trying to record, to understand, to map the moments of disturbance. The patterns were erratic, impossible to predict. Sometimes the whispers were faint, almost melodic, like the echo of a bell. Other times they were harsh, urgent, scraping at the edges of hearing. I started taking meticulous notes, times of day, movements in the classroom, temperature fluctuations, students' positions. Every incident I recorded with obsessive precision. I wanted answers. I had to understand it. Sleep became difficult. I found myself awake in the middle of the night, imagining the shadows in the corners of the room, hearing the soft scratch of chalk across invisible surfaces. Sometimes I dreamed of the classroom, empty but alive with subtle motion, the chalkboard breathing, the chairs shifting, the faintest silhouette standing by the windows. I consulted the archives of the school. Room 12 had once been an art classroom. Several decades ago, a student had fallen and hit her head on the corner of a table. She had survived, but the classroom had been closed for months afterward. Maintenance reports mentioned odd occurrences, cold drafts, objects shifting, but nothing was documented officially. I tried rational explanations: drafts from the heating system, vibrations from construction, the creaking of old wood. None matched the patterns I was seeing. No rational cause explained the handwriting or the words that seemed to form only when I was alone. I avoided the students' attention, hoping to keep my growing unease secret. I didn't want to seem crazy, so I carried it alone, pacing the empty corridors, chalk in hand, staring at a board that sometimes moved on its own. Weeks passed. The events became more frequent. The words on the board grew more complex, sometimes forming single phrases, sometimes only letters that didn't make sense. Don't leave. Watch. Follow. Each one left an imprint in the dust, lingering long after I erased it. I began taking photos, video recordings, anything I could capture. But when I reviewed them, the images were empty. The words never appeared in the recordings. Only I could see them. Only I could feel the presence. At night, walking home, I felt watched, not by people, not by students or colleagues. Something intangible, persistent, invisible, always observing. I avoided talking to anyone about it. Who would believe a man being followed by a classroom? I began to question my own sanity, though I was sure of what I had seen and felt. By December, the school had emptied for the holidays. I returned one afternoon to collect lesson materials. The building was silent, the hallways echoing my footsteps. I stepped into room 12 one last time before leaving, chalk in hand. The board was blank, the air was still, but as I wrote my own name, the chalk tugged again, Not violently, but subtly, like the weight of a hand brushing over mine. A single word formed, clear, deliberate. Soon. I dropped the chalk. The lights flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the windows, the faint outline of a figure standing behind me, then vanishing when I spun around. I left quickly, not looking back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The classroom waits. It remembers. It watches. And I know it always will. I tried everything to make sense of it. Research, reading accounts of hauntings in old schools, talking to psychologists and historians. Nothing explained what I experienced. I cannot tell anyone else. They would dismiss it. They would laugh. So I carry it alone. Even now, after all this time, I still sometimes see the word again, written in the margins of my notes, in my own handwriting, letters that do not belong to me.